Orlando by Virginia Woolf. I read a couple years ago. It was published in um, 1928, and it consists of a very sprawling narrative for about 300 years, over a little over 300 years, from around 1600s, early 1600s, in the Tudor period. And the titular character Orlando is basically it says it's the full title is Orlando: A Biography, but it's so much more. It encompasses way much more than a biography. It was almost like that was like kind of a modest summation of what this story truly captures. It actually not only does it time travel, not only does the main character time travel, but also is partially autobiographical in the sense that it draws from real characters that show up, almost a little bit like in The Loser by Thomas Bernard, where it's people who knew Glenn Gould, but in this case, it's people who Orlando more or less was kind of a real person. Consists of her love, Vita Sackville West, during the Sackville period, and she was a very complicated family history. Excuse me, I don't have my tripod here. But yeah, she Vita Sackville List Vita Sackville West was actually Virginia Woolf's real life lover, and she her own husband. I'm not sure to what extent like the affair lasted and the historicity of it, but I do know that surprisingly, in England at the time, throughout the early 1910s and throughout all this. So at this point, Virginia Woolf actually lived quite a bit. She was born in 1882, I believe, and passed away tragically in the kind of in the height of the World War II, when she basically lost kind of like a good deal of her family due to the war, being drafted into conscripted into some kind of service, and then lost I think like two or three of her sons. So it was very tragic. So she ended up going in a very depressive kind of fit. I think it was a kind of a manic depressive, though I'm not too sure on the exact nature of it. But she went to a cliff and then just couldn't take it anymore. So, but anyway, but yeah. So at this point, so 1928, so she was middle aged and she had lived a little bit. So she had a good friend that they met during the Bloomsbury group, I think, um, which it was a very very like progressive mod, like very like abreast with the like new customs and new times, and kind of doing away with all the kind of pearl clutching kind of traditions of England and kind of the world at large. E.M. Forster, I believe, was a member. I don't know if D.H. Lawrence was, but I know he was kind of a fellow modernist, as with Proust and um, James Joyce. And but yeah, so going back to the story of the Orlando. So she starts out actually as a man, a kind of a androgynous kind of with feminine features, but is born a man. So this is back in the I believe this is the Tudor period, and this is when, and if you see the original one, like if you see like kind of the original copy of Orlando in 1928, the family history, there's a good amount of pictures and pictorial kind of all the kind of Flemish artists and stuff, and the very interesting kind of renditions that they did of certain significant members of like the Tudor period in England. But yeah, so they Orlando, while fictional, I think for the most part, is like very much rooted in reality, in the sense that she's like kind of has a kind of presence in a real, like almost like a historicity of a presence to her. Um, and it's very valid in that sense. But on the other hand, she paints this very beautiful prosaic, poetic kind of look into her life, and um, so in the we're in the 1600s. There's what's called the Great Freeze. I think it was the Frost of 1608 that was in the River Thames, and Virginia Woolf does an excellent like job crafting this like super uh, like very not embellished but ornately crafted economic, like very like wordfully not verbose, but just economic in the sense that there wasn't the way that it's described, I don't know. I wish I had some of the quotes, but if you look at some of the main quotes, that's probably the draw of the main when it's starting, kind of right in the middle of this kind of frost, this stagnant, freezing frost of like the birds are some of the birds drop in midair and like to the ground and are struck dead, and it's just like this how powerful it was, like the way she's able to describe that so without making it over the top or making it seem any more, but at the same time there's so much beauty and like in the aesthetic kind of look into kind of what when like a picture and almost a glimpse into this, like in the same way that Virginia Woolf has such a mastery over not only being able to inhabit what it would be like in the mind of a man of a kind of a young page boy that's in this that's prized by Queen during the Elizabethan era. I'm sorry, but maybe the Tudor period wasn't too far off. But the Elizabethan era, she's a favorite as Orlando. He is favored because he's like a kind of feminine looking boy and teenage boy around, and she falls in love with a Russian lady, a Russian princess, I think, who has a kind of almost wild like kind of nature to her, and this kind of is like a good kind of this kind of burgeons this strong love that he has for this. I can't remember her name, for the princess, and she is kind of she's a Russian. She's like a Slavic kind of maybe from St. Petersburg. I'm not sure, but she's like he. This is kind of an unrequited love because the princess ends up leaving him kind of dead in his tracks, and she's like he doesn't know. I'm sorry, and he kind of has a period of grieving over that and is like trying to recover, and then eventually there's a poet walks around, well rather a poetaster I think is the word, poetaster I think is the it's a word meaning someone who wishes or somebody who poses as something of a relished kind of eminent poet but hasn't actually produced anything or is kind of skating off their coattails and really doesn't have much to offer. They're just kind of an intellectual kind of vacuity of when it well they may be intellectual, but they may be sophist, and would be another word that might be close synonym. I'm not sure. I do know that this Nicholas Green also has the power to kind of swoop through time as Orlando does, and although I'm not sure if he's able to kind of switch genders like Orlando, but I do know that he does end up kind of his character has changed his parts, and he kind of he at first is like kind of spurns Orlando because Orlando, much like Virginia Woolf herself and much like Vita Sackville West, also has affinity for writing and wants to become a better their craft. So at first Nicholas Green ends up spurning or excoriating, giving this criticism of him not being a good enough writer. It was because what he's trying to write Orlando is this thing called this long kind of continuum thing of called that's constantly in media res that's in progress. It's called the oak tree. I think it's called the it's a long kind of poem. It might be a prose poem, kind of work of art. It's kind of epic, kind of cascading like thing that precipitates for years and years and years for the whole 300 years, and then it's finally published at the end. Spoiler, although I'm not really giving much spoiler anyway. But yeah, it's finally coterminous with right when Orlando is published around 1928. So it kind of ends in a contemporaneously. So yeah, I found that was really interesting. So it goes from there's only 6 chapters, but like each chapter is like a kind of quite a big, long, exhaustive kind of not without being exhausting, I should say. But it is the second chapter, I believe. It is when Orlando is still a boy or a man, rather. Is it now is matured into adulthood? Is now has a thing for a certain Duchess Harriet. And this was an actual real person too, so this is another one of the instances. You'll see that too with the instance of Alexander Pope and Jonathan Swift, and there's another poet slash kind of cultural critic kind of. I don't know if that was around the time of maybe Samuel Johnson, but I do know that there where Pope shows up with his like his wit, but also with a very romantic kind of sensibility of right or wrong as well. So, um, but right now you're that's not until like the 1700s. So I think at this point there's Orlando lives, and I think what happens is it's not really explained explicitly, but I think Orlando matures when she reaches maturity around in her late 20s, early 30s. I think she more or less stays the same age. So now on to the next chapter. I think this is chapter 3. She is, I think at this point, as it's now around the Regency period, around I think, or the um, and this is when she's like Nicholas Green kind of shows up again, and it kind of has a change of heart, or I think, and ends up offering his best kind of advice and helps her out kind of in making the oak tree and trying to make it perfect it. And then, so I think that could just be because he was reaching a kind of mental state of maturity and is like less kind of a kind of like false kind of pseudo intellectual, I suppose. So now you get to the point where there's a lot of at some point it's not really explicitly stated why, but it's kind of almost the same way that Kafka kind of has Gregor Samsa turning into a bug. I felt this is similar, but not obviously way less morbid. But so this at some point this is when Orlando Prince wakes up one day to be a female. She still has the very exact same sense, experiential, I guess, epistemological being, kind of the self is still there, inner, like the same subjective, every last bit of the self has this all all this the capsules of this all these traits and these sub traits of all her personality are there, but they all her physical body changes. So this is very interesting because she's like, I actually much like being a woman now. I actually much prefer it. But at first, she only admits that only after a lot of kind of or Virginia Woolf being quite the feminist, quite modern feminist. I think way beyond her time. In a room of one's own too, of like making vouching and completely advocating for these views and these kind of that woman should have a room of one's own in order to, because it actually takes more than just kind of it's these women that have been kind of forgotten by history that she's been talking about, and you kind of see this here, but like maybe to a lesser degree, of women that are kind of overshadowed and just kind of in the courts of of different regency periods of just having to wear ridiculous amounts of layers and tight corsets and like like just how much time put into their bodices and their all the how much time was put into their bouffant kind of hairstyles. And this is my very kind of limited knowledge on the time period, but just to think of how and this is what made me love the movie too. I think the movie is a little bit short. I felt like the movie should have been longer. This Sally Porter in directed and starring Tilda Swinton, of course. That was one of her kind of brought her to a more serious kind of, I think, because it was like one of her first, I think, feature length kind of leading roles. So, or Tilda Swinton, not just because of her effortless ability of already having that look of of having kind of features of feminine and masculine, but kind of blended together in a but also this ability to, with just very subtle hints and like looks at the cameras and like a kind of a wry look and a kind of like a very simple understated, I guess, nuance. The ability, I guess, this is makes her such a great actress. Is this ability to just kind of communicate a lot with very little, without having to say a lot. So that's kind of what I got from Orlando, and also Billy Zane's in it. He didn't do too bad. He played Marmaduke. Gosh, I'm gonna butcher this. Marmaduke. What was it? He had one of the most funniest names, I think. In he was supposed to be kind of her first kind of real love of the entire narrative, and I think he shows up as the Marmaduke. He's kind of a I think a fisher, he's hunter kind of a man's man in that sense of respect, and he kind of is a bit of a foil, but like their romance is kind of it's fueled by a very interesting kind of dynamic between at first kind of seeming like there's not a lot of anything new, I guess, to it. Like it doesn't seem like it's like well, because in the same sense that he loved that Russian princess, that she was kind of a feral kind of wild, and he was very much kind of more toned down and more sentimental page boy. That was kind of beholden to the courts of Elizabeth. I think this kind of the romance between Orlando and then Marmaduke was very, I don't know how to describe it. It was very interesting because it was like he had all the kind of bearings or the kind of a kind of man, like but like their romance seemed to have some kind of weight to it, like there's something more deeper going on. So yes, so the that kind of and then through the next 100 or so years, there's some point where I think this might have been before, so I might be getting the chronology a bit mixed up, but I think Orlando ends up getting kind of mixed up with the Romani crowd, the Romani people, which is an ethnic group somewhere. I'm not sure if it's like kind of near the Lombards, but they're kind of a ethnic kind of group that were a bit of a kind of diaspora, kind of taken from a. I'm not sure if it's out kind of in the Mediterranean area, but or if it's to be mixed up with the Roman people. But I think the Romani were their own specific kind of very interesting kind of exotic group that she gets mixed up with. So there's a lot of traveling around. Does a lot of traveling around. It's not rigid. It's not like she just stays in the same place in the kind of England, Muriel, the England of the UK and British Isles and all that. It's as much as I love that kind of, but she's in fitting with the actual narrative of Vita Sackville West. I think there's a lot of movement and falling in love with people from different nationalities and countries and going, and there's almost like a kind of restlessness, not like a restless, but it's kind of she stays the same very much. They stay the same, I guess. Is the adequate form, but Orlando very much with time and with the keeping up with the times, ends up finally publishing. I think I mentioned this, the Oak Tree, and right in the time when Virginia Woolf, so coming up all the way to modern times, publishes it in 1928. So yeah, I think that's all. I did leave a great deal out there, but yeah, there are. Yeah, it's just interesting, kind of how this kind of there's like a kind of phlegmatic kind of coolness to Orlando's character. She's very there's a lot going on underneath. There's like a lot of like a state, not I think the word stayed. It's not like there's no like pent up anger. There's no malice. There's no anything. She's very calm and she's very even keeled, and they are and they go throughout this and the experimental kind of the slight satire without being too burning about it, but that Wolf showcases here is very astounding. I'd say it's probably one of my favorite works by her. I'd say probably one of the most ambitious works, although I haven't read The Voyage Out yet. That's on left on my list. I have read her writer's diary, where we get a kind of an image of her daily life and what she did, and I quite enjoyed that a bit as well. But the kind of tone of this is very, I don't know. It's like thoughtful, and it's like it's not overly like snobbish. I guess it's not like, oh, I know about all these the kind of all the royalty and all, it's not, but at the same time it's able to kind of tell a simple love story through the lens of a kind of the style and the experimental a free flowing kind of attitude and the It's able to kind of very tell a kind of heartfelt, sincere romance, and that's what I love. And I think on that note, that's all I have for Virginia Woolf's Orlando, a biography. And yeah, so I definitely recommend it. And let me know what you guys think below if you have read it or have planning on reading it, or but yeah, I'm trying to learn every day, and trying to figure out what my aims and stuff and what I'm reading next. And I'm reading. I've just started basically Ruth Ozeki's A Tale from the Time Being, and I'll let you guys know how that pans out. And that's all I have for now. Thanks.